And then in 2007, I lost somebody very close to me to a heroin overdose. And I felt angry at addiction at that moment in time. But then I decided I could either sit in that anger or I could do something to help.
I mean, you're acquiring the real estate and then you are putting a business into the real estate that you own. When you're finding a home to purchase for this purpose, for this business, do you have a set criteria that you go through? I mean, I was just thinking about all the criteria that I go through for real estate investments, assisted living facilities and apartment complexes.
If you are going to do that, understand addiction, understand where they're coming from. Don't just get into it for the money. I do want to preface it. You can make good money in sober living, but please don't just get into it for the shiny object syndrome or the money, because the ones that I have seen be successful have a very good balance of making money and having heart.
Devana, I am so excited to have you on the Conscious Investor podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
This is an episode that I've been looking forward to, a conversation I've been looking forward to, because a lot of what you're doing is so dear to my heart. But the conscious investor doesn't know what you do. So let's start with, and the question, conscious investor, what do you do and how did you get started?
Yeah. So I love the co-living space, but specifically the supported living, sober living. So I now am about to open my 4th house in about 2 weeks. So I specialize in sober livings.
How did you get started in the sober living space, in the supportive living?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, I have some family members that have struggled with addiction throughout their life, and kind of seeing them go through sober living was hurtful to me, because I would see some sober livings that I didn't think were the greatest. Even ones that were very expensive, there were still some shenanigans kind of going on within some of these homes. And then in 2007, I lost somebody very close to me to a heroin overdose. And I felt angry at addiction at that moment in time. But then I decided I could either sit in that anger or I could do something to help. So I decided I wanted to do sober livings, but I wanted to do them totally different than what I was seeing out there at the time. And then also, oddly enough, too, my grandmother owned a sober living when I was growing up. I didn't really understand the business model of it, or I went there, but I was young, a teenager, and I wasn't paying attention to how it was all set up and all that kind of stuff. But I was familiar with the term and the just the way a sober living came about or whatever growing up, but I didn't know all the details. So moving forward, it was something that I kind of looked back on and went, that's so interesting. I wish I would have asked her to learn more about it back then, or tour one back then, but I just found my way on my own, I guess.
What a brief but rich way to step into something and to discover that your grandmother had sober living. Is she still alive, or has she?
No, she was a business lady, and she owned a very large business, but one of her other children suffered. I have a lot of addiction in my family. One of her other daughters suffered from addiction, and I believe the story was owned a house, but kind of came to a place that it was a lot for her. So my grandmother was like, well, let's turn this into a sober living and help people. So she kind of changed her route she was going on with her house and changed that into a sober living.
That's really neat. So I'm 3rd generation in real estate in my family, and it's interesting to see how sometimes there is a through line amongst generations and how the generations respond to the circumstances that surround them.
Yeah, that is an interesting way to look at it for sure. So yeah, that's what I do now, and I absolutely love it. I wouldn't change it for the world. A lot of people will say to me wow, how do you deal with so many people in one house? And to me, it doesn't matter if I have 5 people or 24 people. It's no more work for me, because I have all my systems and procedures set up. So I just want to help as many people as I can. So
I
that's
love it.
keep going bigger and bigger and bigger.
Like more and more and more. Well, let's back up a little bit. And for those who are not, I mean, sober living, in my mind, I mean, put it in the most elementary way, it seems like, oh, okay, it's people that are, struggling with alcohol addiction and they're coming into this environment. But I feel like there's more going on beneath the surface. And I also think that for many, listeners, they might not be familiar with what this even represents or what the scope could be. And so can you just tell us what sober living encompasses and what supportive living is? And let's get into that part of it.
Yeah. So it's like you said, a supportive living environment. Most people, at least in my house personally, there's an array of ways you can do it, from state funded, county funded, private pay funded, people who are, I don't want to say forced to be there, but kind of forced to be there. Maybe they had a court sentence and the judge said, hey, instead of going to jail, you can try sober living. And then we can, if you can complete that, then we can, we won't send you to jail. There's that
Right.
realm of it. In my houses, people are not, it's a choice to be there. So everybody in my house can choose whether to be in my house or some other person's house. It is a very structured living environment. So most people will go into a rehab, a residential rehab, where they can maybe 30, 60, or 90 days of rehab where they get therapy and counseling, group settings. They first go into the detox part, then they get moved to the residential rehab part, go through some, like I said, groups, therapy, different things to kind of get their grounding back and get everything out of their system and think clear-headed. And then after they leave there, they don't want to maybe necessarily go back into an old environment, or maybe if it's a spouse, maybe their spouse is still drinking and they're like, I want to go to sober living before I go back home. There's a lot of reasons why they don't want to go back home. So they'll come into sober living, and we're like a step down from rehab. So they have freedom. They can come and go during the day for work or school or outpatient or anything like that, but they have to be back in by curfew. So we have very strict rules. You have to wake up at a certain time. You have a chore that we have very clean houses. So we have actually 2 sets of chores. We have AM and PM. And then they're free to come and go during the day, but they're back in by curfew. And then they also get randomly drug and alcohol tested. And then they have to do so many, I'll say it like this, but I'll explain a little bit more. They have to do so many meetings per week. Most sober livings will do like AA or NA. Like you have to do 3 to 5 AA or NA meetings per week. I have a little more flexibility in modalities, because I think that, most people connect with AA or NA, but not everybody does. And I don't want to just force somebody to go to an AA meeting or an NA meeting just to get their signature on their card to prove to me they were somewhere. I want them to go somewhere that they're actually going to get what they need out of it. So we take some different modalities than some other houses, and it works really great for us. But overall, they're in a structured living environment, but they're mutually supported by each other. So say you have 18 people in a house. Well, let's take my female house, for instance. I have 17 females living in a house. It is the most amazing thing to see these women together. They come home from their day and maybe they had a rough day. Another one knows exactly what they're going through, so they can sit and mutually support each other through some hard times. And they all understand what each other's going through. So it's a really beautiful thing.
I was going to ask you how the house is. I'm writing down questions as you're talking because it's so fascinating. And when you and I met, I really wanted to go into, more depth, but at conferences, there are so many interruptions. It's hard to have a continuous conversation without interruptions. And I was going to ask you if the houses were, gender specific, or if they were co-ed. So it sounds like each house is like, this is, for ladies, this is for gentlemen type situation.
Yeah. You can do co-ed. I know some co-ed houses. I personally like peace in my life a little bit too much to do a co-ed house. I think that it brings a little bit more of a dramatic experience sometimes. So I do have gender specific, but we are LGBTQ friendly. So we have we are friendly with all that. So I do have right now 1 female house and 3 male houses.
That's really fascinating. Uh, really weird questions that as you were talking, I was just wondering, who who does the random drug testing? Is there someone that is on site at each house all the time, 24/7, or how does that operate?
Yeah. So again, there's a few different ways to do it. We have a house that has managers. And so the managers live in the house. They're not there 24 hours a day because they're allowed to have their own life. Maybe they have a job outside of the house, but they do live there. So I try to have people who, if somebody works at night, there's going to be somebody there at night. If somebody works during the day, usually there's someone that's kind of off during the day. So I personally like to have a lot of coverage over my houses. So sometimes I have between 2 and 4 people that are kind of overseeing things in each house. And that can range from a manager to an assistant manager to a senior resident, depending on what they kind of do.
Are there any qualifications that you look for? Do you see how I am genuinely so intrigued and so curious about how this works?
Yeah. The qualifications for me are they have to be in recovery themselves to understand what somebody in the home is going through. So for me, I usually have a manager. They have to have at least 2 years clean and sober themselves and working a good program and really strong in their recovery because they are supporting everybody else in the house, overseeing things, and they need to, be strong within themselves. So that's my qualification for that. I mean, obviously there's a lot of little qualifications on responsibilities and organized and, all of those things. But the main thing is that they have to at least have 2 years clean and sober.
Is that, is it complicated to find? You always hear people talk about how, finding quality, employees is challenging these days. This is so niche. Are a lot of people drawn to supporting, people in their addiction once they're past that recovery or?
Well, I will say the first house the first manager you ever hire is your hardest one to find. So you probably will go through a couple in the beginning till you kind of get to the one that you're like, okay, this is the one that's going to stay for a while. But after your first house is established, then I go from within my house. So say I have somebody who's a manager for 2 years and he or she comes to me and says, hey, I'm moving on, I'm getting my own place, I'm getting married, whatever the situation is. Then I look for a person that's been in my house. That's the most responsible. They've been there a couple years. They know how the house is ran. So the transition is so seamless. They already know how the intake process works, all of our rules and systems and procedures. So it's very easy to transition them into that position. So once you have your house established, it's not that difficult to find somebody if you have people who have been there for a while.
That's actually super cool because it's promoting from within, essentially.
Yeah.
That's really neat. And then who leads meetings? Do you have meetings on site and just allow different organizations to come in and lead, or how does that work?
We don't have AA or NA meetings on site. They go out to different meetings, but we do have a house meeting, depending on the house and how established it is. I have some that are extremely established and they don't need a meeting every week. And then I have others that we need a meeting every week. So if we don't need a meeting every week, then we have it at least every 2 weeks or once a month. I go personally to those meetings, or my manager will run the meetings if for some reason I can't be at the meeting.
Okay. And what happens at these particular meetings?
So again, every house is different, so I'll just talk about mine. I like to check in with each person. For me, it's extremely important to know everybody in my house. A lot of people who own sober livings don't know who's living in their houses. They don't really know them. They have somebody else who takes care of it. Or the new trend in real estate investing is to have a sober living, but you don't actually own and operate it. You own the property, but you arbitrage it out to an organization. So you really, I guess you're not really doing sober living. You might own a house that's doing sober living. but they're not going to know the people in the house or be really connected to that house in the same way an operator is. So it's very important for me to know every single person in my house. So when we do the meetings, I know them all by name. I know all their stories, and I like to check in with each of them. And just like an overall feeling of the week. And sometimes it's hard for people to address their feelings. They'll just say, I'm good. And I'm like, nope, good's not an emotion. You have to give me, I like dive deeper and make them give me an actual emotion. And then that lets me just see kind of where everybody's at. And if somebody's like checks in with like frustration or something like that, then I know, okay, I need to check in with that person, or the manager needs to check in with that person so we can give them a little bit more support or see where they're struggling. And then we go on to some house situations. Everything that always comes up in most sober livings is don't leave your cup in the sink, wash your dishes and put them away. So I feel like sometimes you have to, say the same things over and over every week. And then we go on to a topic. So usually I pick a topic that would be of interest to everybody, and we talk about that topic. Maybe we watch a little video, maybe somebody comes in and speaks, maybe I've even had like sound baths come in and do like sound bath with the guys or the girls. So yeah, we've done lots of things over the years, even some art stuff, like just kind of break it up and do some different things.
That's really, really cool. Now, do you have, you have a high level of awareness, and I don't know if you have a background that, do you have a background that prepared you for this other than a heart and compassion and empathy and all of that? Or
I think my own background, like I was very codependent for a lot of my life. And I think that that's really normal when you come from a family with addiction, because there's no way to be in a relationship, whether it's a friend or a coworker, a family member, a spouse. You cannot be in a relationship with somebody with an addiction without being codependent. It wouldn't work. And that's the only reason that the relationship works, is because one of them is codependent, or
Right.
both. But I was very codependent in my life with some family members. And at a certain point in time, I felt just as sick as they were in their addiction, because codependency is a very hard thing to break. So I had to do my own journey on healing, and lots of therapy and lots of workshops and lots of personal growth books and codependent no more books and all of that stuff. So I think just through that, I've learned so much on how to deal with situations and just dealing with people in addiction. I'm very keen to it. Like, I know when the manipulations come, I know when a story comes at me, I already know the ending of it. I already know I could even like finish the story for them. I've heard it all, right? So I do have compassion, and I look at them in a different light. A lot of people in society look at people who have addictions as losers. These are the words I've heard, not anything I feel, but no, they're just losers, or they're this, or they're that. And they're one of the most sensitive people I've ever met. Like, they're amazing people. When somebody can get off of heroin, like having a heroin addiction, I'm going to get emotional, having a heroin addiction for 10 years, and they can get off of that and get their life back, they're unstoppable if they can put their life in the right direction. If they can use what they learned on the streets or in their addiction and put it in a different direction, they're amazing people. I see it every day. Sorry, I'm getting a little emotional. So I see them just as different people. I don't see the addiction part. I look past that and see that there's a reason. And the opposite of addiction is not clean and sober, it's connection. And there's a lot of trauma-based stuff with people that it's not that they were just bad people and wanted to start using drugs and alcohol. There's something they're running from. So if we can figure out what they're running from, what they're trying to disconnect from, then I've seen a lot of people not get those cravings and stuff from drugs and alcohol anymore, because they're not having to run as much from all that stuff inside. So I get a lot of times like, well, why don't you just put one person in a room? Or why do you have so many people? Again, it's the connection. It's detrimental to them to have them just alone in their room. They isolate and they don't have that mutual support from other people. So That's what the whole model of sober living is connection and being in a house with like-minded people who are going through the same thing.
That's so powerful. I love that concept. The opposite of addiction is connection. It makes me think this, my background is, this is my meadow. And on the other side of those trees is a grove of aspen-like trees. And they're all supported by their roots. That's how they are supported. And so many trees are designed like this. And so it's neat to think of humans like this, where we are stronger when we are connected and we have that support. We can withstand the winds that want to blow us around and such. Like, that's so beautiful. And I love how I always see how God repurposes every bit of my past to create my future, and nothing is lost. There is nothing that has not been repurposed in some capacity. And I love your awareness and willingness to understand also. And the fact that you weren't, sometimes people ask me a question like, well, what qualifications do you have to, be a performance coach, or, real estate? That's a no-brainer. I have a lot of qualifications there. But it's interesting to say, like, no, actually, my past is, and the work that I've done is exactly what prepares me for the work that I do now. And it's so important. And I almost think there's a gap that forms when people with well-intentioned people aim to serve, but they don't have any personal experience. And so well-intentioned, the depth of the service can only go so far.
Yep. And I think you can learn as much as you want in a book, as much as you can in a book or on the internet and whatever. You could research addiction all you want. But I agree with you. When you live or have relationships with people and you actually in life go through the ups and downs, or you understand their struggle with anything. I mean, I went through lots of crazy things in my life, and people ask me like, oh, don't you wish that never happened? And I don't. I never wish that it didn't happen. I'm so grateful for every single thing that's happened in my life, because I would not be able to do, and I know that sounds so cliche, I would not be able to do what I do today if I hadn't personally went through some of these experiences, especially with the females in my house, that I can connect with them on different, sexual abuses and different things. Like, I would be like, I don't know what you're going through right now, but I can empathize with you, but I don't understand it. But when they talk about certain things, I relate, I can understand exactly how they feel, and I can help them more through that. Now, I'm not a therapist, and I don't do any therapy at my place. They go outside of that, but just as a support system for them. Yeah, I've been through a lot of things in my life, so I have a lot of experience with a lot of stuff.
And I think this is a good reminder for all of us to take stock of our past in a very positive way. I'm like you, where I've had a lot of hard knocks, and I wouldn't want any of them to not be there because of the beauty it's created and the opportunity to serve people so powerfully. And so really taking inventory of maybe some narratives that we wish were gone. Now, you and I are fine, but conscious investor, you might not have done this type of work, but maybe there's something in your past that you wish, you could just erase. And perhaps this can provide an opportunity to reframe that.
Well, I just think there's a gift in everything, even the most traumatic experience. It might not be in the moment. You might not see it in that moment, but 5 years from that period of time, or a year, whatever the time period is, you can always look back and see a gift in something.
Definitely. Yep. Just give it some time.
Yeah.
Give it time. Now, your sober living homes are in normal neighborhoods, very similar to residential assisted living, where, elderly people go and have care, and it's in a neighborhood. How does that work? Is it well received? Is there resistance? What are the sentiments? And is there a process that you have to go through? Do you have to go through an approval process to even have a sober living home within a neighborhood? Let's talk about that a bit.
Yeah, I've had both experiences. hard and easy. There is no approval process. Sober livings are protected under the Federal Fair Housing Disabilities Act. So they are allowed to be in a residential neighborhood without, you don't have to ask permission from anybody. I've had some houses, most of my houses open, and neighbors, there's no problem. In fact, they'll bring cookies over and welcome. And they're, I get stories from neighbors like, oh, my nephew, went through this, and wow, this was such a great thing, or different things like that. My second house, I had one neighbor at first say, whoa, what's going on? There's a lot of people. And it was just me having a really good conversation with him. And after the conversation, he's like, wow, I never looked at it like that. I think a lot of people in their mind think sober living and they think drug addicts, like they're literally actively using drugs. And it's the opposite. It's like they have curfew. There's not going to be any parties. They're not even having a glass of wine at night. Like they're going to be the cleanest house on the neighborhood.
This is the most chill house ever.
Yeah. There's nothing going on.
My neighbors. Growing up, my neighbors, and it's funny because one of the parents was a superintendent of an entire school district, right? And mom and dad went away, and they threw quite the party.
Exactly. So it's most of the time, in my experience, it's just having a conversation, and educating them on what you actually do and what the house is going to be like. Now, I will preface it by this. There's probably more good, not probably, there are more good sober livings than there are bad. But most people just hear about the bad ones. It's just like the news, right? If I listen to the news, I hear negative things about police officers, but I personally know a lot of police officers that are amazing people. You just don't hear about all the good stories about stuff. It's the same with sober livings. If you just heard the news, or you read stuff, or you listen to people's horror stories, you're going to hear about the bad stuff, because all the good ones, they don't make the news. They don't do anything. So there are some bad ones out there. My mission and goal in life is to help educate people on making quality houses, because I think for anything, it can go for short term. Any investment you have, I am a huge advocate for being a great landlord. Hospitality is my thing. Even in sober living, most people just put them in. They come, they've got their welcome thing. It's a whole thing. I love hospitality with people. So that being said, there might be some houses that neighbors get mad at because they're not keeping their yard clean, or, and they're right. I don't think they should be mad because it's a sober living, but I think they should be upset maybe if they're not keeping their yard clean, or at the things that are not happening. But I have not had any bad interactions up until probably a few months ago with my new house that I'm opening. My neighbors did get very upset when they found out that we were opening a sober living. And it ended up in, going to city council, talking to city council, ended up having a conversation with the neighbors. And I think I had to put myself in their shoes and not just come defensive. I had to just really sit and say, okay, where are they coming from? And listen to their fears, because then I could understand where those are all coming from, if that makes sense. It's not easy. It feels easier just to get defensive, because I know what my houses are. And to me, in my head, I'm like, why are they getting so upset? Like, my houses are amazing and great and whatever. But I had to say, well, hold on, they don't know that. And they've never experienced a sober living before. So let's just have a conversation about what my houses at least are going to be like. So it came down to, we had a neighborhood meeting. A city council member was there, and I just fielded questions from all of them and answered their questions, and hopefully put their minds at ease a little bit.
Yeah. Well, since this is a protected, what? Now I'm curious what they were aiming to achieve.
I think they wanted to ask why I had so many people in a house. They wanted to know why I didn't just put like 6 people in a house. Because this new house is going to have 24 people. So in their mind, they're like, 24 guys in a house. It must be crazy fights and dirty and crazy stuff going on. But they don't understand we have very strict systems and procedures and the managers and like rules and regulations and all that stuff. So it is not chaotic. It is actually very, believe it or not, it's a crazy concept to think 24 guys in one house, but it's actually an amazing, beautiful thing when you can see it if the house is run good and there's good owners and operators and managers, just like with anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I also think they also don't know. I think their concern was we're a tight-knit community. They all know each other. They've all, they're all very close neighbors. And they were concerned about who was coming in. Like, do they have criminal backgrounds? Are they, pedophiles? Are they like, our kids are on the street? Like, who's coming into our neighborhood? So we just had open conversations about all of that. And, I'm sure that they still are probably nervous because they haven't seen it in action. But I think once the house is open, they're going to understand what I was saying was how it's going to be.
Yeah. I have just this little inkling of suspicion that they are probably going to be the best neighbors and that they are going to end up very much valuing what this brings into the neighborhood.
I hope so. And at first I was a little taken back by like a whole neighborhood coming at me. But I actually appreciate that they are a tight-knit community and they watch out for each other and, they care about each other because not all neighborhoods do that. So I'm looking at the positives that came out of it instead of it being a negative situation. I think that there was a lot of positives that came out of it. I don't know for them if they feel the same way, but at least for me, I learned so much. It gave me experiences to go in front of city council and all the things I've never done before. And it gave me an opportunity. I've never had a whole meeting with a neighborhood before. I've always dealt with just maybe one neighbor or, so there was a lot that came out of it that I learned and that I appreciate.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So how do you keep everything neat, tidy, clean? What are the day-to-day operations look like? Because you and I have spoken before. And so I know that you have this fine-tuned, but I really don't know the complexities of it. We don't have to get into the nitty-gritty, but, if you can give us an overview of what is it that makes your sober living homes successful and operating efficiently. And when I say efficiently, I mean with a humanity and a beauty and collaboration and connection. And
yeah. So everybody wakes up in the morning. They have to be up by a certain time. Their beds have to be made before they can leave before they leave their room, really. Make their beds, tidy their areas, and then they go do their chore right away, first thing in the morning. And then they're free to come and go during the day. And then at night when they come home from curfew, then the PM chore person comes on. And as soon as they come in for curfew, the first thing they do is do their PM chores. So the house is clean before everybody goes to bed and clean right after everybody wakes up. So it really, you would think you have to scrub a house with 24 guys in it, like constantly, but really their chore probably only takes them 15 minutes, if that, because it's being cleaned, mopped, swept, scrubbed twice a day. There's not, doesn't ever get grungy enough to have to do that. And then once a month we have double scrub, and that's where they pull out beds from the walls and every baseboard is done and, under your bed's cleaned and every ceiling fan, every blade on the blinds, like you get really down and gritty and clean, all the little areas that don't get cleaned during the week. So we have daily and then we have weeklies a little bit. Every Saturday is a little bit deeper. And then once a month is like really, really like triple, double, quadruple scrubbed. Like we get in there. And the manager oversees that. So he checks chores every day. They have to sign for their chore and what time they did it. We have cameras in the common areas. So we can roll back and see if somebody, signed when they didn't really do their chore. If the manager goes in and goes, this does not look like it was done, but it was signed, we have ways to check that. And if they didn't do it or they didn't do it good enough, we just ask them, hey, can you, go give a little more attention to that area? And it's a lot for accountability. So sometimes it gets hard. Like they'll do the chore, but they'll forget to sign, or they'll say, why do we have to sign? We already did the chore. Why is that? And I always teach them, it's like another step in follow through. And we all have habit bodies. And if you don't follow through, you weaken that habit body. So every time, like as an example, as a mom, if your kid's shoes are out and I say, oh, go put your shoes away, and then they don't do it. And 3 hours later, I still see them there. I'm like, oh, I'll just do it. It's just easier. I just weakened their habit body. If I hold them accountable and say, hey, make sure your shoes go away, and they actually take the shoes and put them away, you just strengthen their habit body. So it's the same way with sober living. The managers don't go in and just clean up all their messes. It's like if somebody left dishes, we figure out who it was, and then we go to them directly and say, hey, you left dishes in the sink. Can you go do that? And it's just them following through on all those things. Signing is like the same. You wouldn't go to work and say, where's my paycheck? And well, you didn't check in. Well, I was here. You saw me. Well, you didn't stamp your time card. Like it's getting them ready to get back into life and have that accountability and the follow through to help them in all the other aspects of their life. So it might sound silly in the moment of making your bed and signing for your chore sheet, but we have a whole reason of why we make them do all those little tiny things.
I love this. Now, I want to ask you, I know we're running shy on time right now, but I want to ask you a couple of questions on the investing side. When you're looking at, you're acquiring the real estate and then you are putting a business into the real estate that you own. When you're finding a home to purchase for this purpose, for this business, do you have a set criteria that you go through? I mean, I was just thinking about all the criteria that I go through for real estate investments, assisted living facilities and apartment complexes. I wouldn't know what the criteria is for something of this nature.
Yeah. Well, so my buy box, I get really clear on my buy box, get really clear on the area that I want to invest in. Then, and it's weird because each house is different. I can't just say, oh, I want a house that's $800,000 and 10 people in it. This $800,000 house, for whatever reason, might turn out different than this $800,000 house, depending on the layout of the house or how many beds you can get in there and that kind of thing. So each house, I literally have to analyze each house, no matter if it's similar in price or area. It totally depends on the layout. So I first kind of figure out, I find a house that I like, and then I go through and analyze it and see how much it can bring in to make sure I cover everything. And then if the numbers don't work, I move on to the next thing. And yeah, it's kind of similar to probably a residential assisted living. Like you kind of have to see the layout. There's a lot of times though that I'll find a great house, like this new one. It was a great house, but needed a little tweak inside. Maybe this house, I didn't take down any walls or anything like that, but in some of my other ones, I might have taken down a wall, added a bathroom to make it work. So sometimes you won't find the perfect house, but you can configure it the way you need.
That makes sense. And do you notice, like, are there particular types of communities where it's more advantageous? Is there a market analysis for the need for sober living? Or is this just something that it's needed and it's a given?
It's
Can you
needed.
see how naive I am?
It's needed, but there are definite other criteria. So location is a huge part. I've heard of a few people wanting to do rural areas, and that can almost more be like a retreat, but they do most of the time not all have cars. So you need to be like near public transportation, near where they could take a public transit to get a job, even if it's an entry-level job. But grocery store, maybe somebody has to walk. Can they walk to the grocery store? A lot of times buses are slow just because there's so many stops and stuff. So I wouldn't want them to have to take a bus. If they didn't have a car, I would want them to be able to walk to a grocery store, because taking a bus could take an hour just to get to a grocery store if it's even half a mile away. So usually I like a grocery store to be within a mile, because most people can walk a mile, no problem. And also a good recovery hub, because they are going to want to do some meetings. And, sometimes if there's a rehab close by, that's where you can get a referral from, if they're somewhat in the neighborhood, or not neighborhood, but vicinity, then you can build a relationship with a nearby rehab. I don't think it has to be in like a huge metropolitan city like downtown LA. You could do it all over suburbs and stuff like that. But just places that they can get jobs, they can get on public transport, and they can have some type of recovery community.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. Devana, this has been so much fun. It's been fun just getting to know this passion project that you have. And it's so great when our passions provide income and means for everything in our life also. And that's where I think the best investing takes place, is when everybody's winning, because we have lives to lead, and we have bills to pay, and we have, so it's like, it's so great when you and others have found their purpose, found their passion, connected that, and just amplified it. So everyone is benefiting from it. Apparently I'm going to trip over my words now.
I will say this too, because I know in the beginning we kind of talked about having some experience in doing this that kind of helps do it. I do know people who aren't I'm not in recovery myself. I just have a lot of experience with recovery, which helps me because I can relate to the families and I can relate to the residents as well. But I do know people who don't have any recovery experience with family members and that kind of stuff, and they still do great. But if you are going to do that, understand addiction, understand where they're coming from. Don't just get into it for the money. I do want to preface it. You can make good money in sober living, but please don't just get into it for the shiny object syndrome or the money, because the ones that I have seen be successful have a very good balance of making money and having heart. When I see people just get into it for the money, you might make some money, but it's not going to be super successful, and your reputation will get to where these people talk. It's a small community, and they go to other sober livings or other places and say, my owner does not care about it. They feel it when you don't care about them. So I think it's really important to understand, if you're going to get into this industry, do it with a balance of heart and finances, not just money. And you can't just do it with heart, because you wouldn't keep the lights on. So you have to have that good balance.
Amen. I couldn't say any of that better. I speak about this a lot on the podcast, and this is why it's a winning situation. And absolutely. And with the assisted living facilities and such that my company invests in, you can't just buy an assisted living facility. We're not residential. We're big. We have scale. We're at scale. And you have to know how to operate. You have to have the heart and the compassion. And there has to be more. Money's great, but you have to have more. Money's not, it's a tool. So
yeah, exactly.
Love it. Devana, if anyone is interested in learning more about what you do, I believe you have a book. Or is your book coming out? I'm embarrassed to say that I can't recall where we're at on the book cycle, but I'd love to know, how can people connect up with you and learn more about sober living and what you're up to?
Yep. So my book is in the editing stages. It's almost done. I just have a couple little things I want to add to it. And then it'll go it's in the self-editing stage, and then it'll go to the editors. I'm not sure when that will come out, because I kind of put it on hold this last couple months because I'm getting this house ready to open, and then I'm leaving out of the country. So I'm kind of taking the summer off from any coaching or any book writing right now, and I'll resume when I get back from out of the country. But you can go on my Instagram, which is Devana Invests. I have pulled back from some of my social media, like I said, in the last couple months, because I've just got so much on my plate. I'm just kind of taking a break from everything. But there are some things on there, and there will be some more things in the future.
I love that. And it's important. You're also you're being a role model, and we do need to take a break. And this isn't a quick sprint type situation in life. We're in it for the long haul. We need to have rest, recovery, relaxation, rejuvenation, all the R's, get them all covered. I love that. Devana, thank you so much for your time, for coming on the show. And Conscious Investor, thank you so much for taking time to listen to this amazing podcast and this just this other way that we can invest and support humans and residents. And it's so exciting. If you found this helpful, if you found it interesting or informative, please take a moment to support the show for free by sharing it with somebody. Post it on your social profiles, share a clip with someone you care about that you know this might be encouraging or inspiring to. And remember, don't be a stranger. Reach out to me. Head on over to IamAconsciousinvestor.com. Yep, full sentence affirmation. Head on over and you can connect up with me on the calendar. Lots of fun things you can download and other resources there. Until next time, cheers to your health, your mindset, and your wealth.